distinguished delegates, participants of this important international conference, dear fellow fighters for peace and justice from Serbia and the world. In particular, we greet the comrades, the host organization of the Belgrade Forum and the other Serbian organizations, which deserve congratulations and great respect for organizing this extremely important conference under this title, but also for another reason. In a period and in a country where the crimes of NATO and of imperialism against the peoples of Yugoslavia are being heard less and less by the mainstream media, internationally and locally, the Belgrade Forum for the World of Equals and its leadership is maintaining not only its firm principles, but also the commitment towards truth against the shameful creation of the NATO and European Union protectorate in the Serbian province of Kosovo. We are for many reasons here in Belgrade today. We do not forget the NATO aggression of 1999 with its 78 days of murderous bombing. Neither do we consider it as a separate incident of NATO's 65 years full of crimes history, a history of aggressions against humanity. We are glad that we organized the day before yesterday here in Belgrade with our member organizations of the European section and with the kind help of the Belgrade Forum, our regional meeting of World Peace Council, which is after more than 25 years a constitutional meeting held in the former Yugoslavia, today in Serbia. We are proud that this international conference is being held with our support as World Peace Council, and the huge overall international participation proves also the importance of it. Dear friends, Yugoslavia and its peoples became victims of the imperialist strategy after 1991, starting from the secession in the north with Croatia and Slovenia, and its unilateral recognition by Germany then, the plans to split Bosnia-Herzegovina, the Dayton Agreement, and the plans to split off the remaining parts of Yugoslavia and Serbia, where their goals were not achieved by arbitrary negotiations, like the last ones before the aggression in Rambouillet, they passed on to open military intervention. Till today, several other peoples and countries are being threatened or even occupied by the US and its allies, by NATO and the European Union, which is being militarized more and more. The case of Yugoslavia and the NATO aggression against its peoples in 1999, the creation of the protectorate in the Serbian province of Kosovo, was a precedent case in a chain of later aggressions under various pretexts and excuses, whether in Afghanistan and Iraq, who are still under foreign occupation, or the aggressions against Mali and Libya, the Central African Republic, threats against the peoples of Syria, the colored revolutions in Georgia, or the bloody coup these days in the Ukraine. The list is unending. If we consider the ongoing efforts of imperialist forces in many other regions and continents together, always the causes are the control of energy resources, of markets, of spheres of influence, the competition often between the imperialist forces and centers for the bigger shares. Dear friends, today humanity is facing threats to peace and security mainly triggered by the policy of the imperialist powers led by the United States of America in all corners of the world. Imperialism is becoming increasingly aggressive, threatening peace and sovereignty, and moving to reassign markets, to redraw broad borders, to plunder national resources. The US, NATO, the EU, and other imperialist forces are seeking new instruments and pretexts for aggression. Among these are the so-called responsibility to protect, plans for democratization of the Middle East, so-called democratization, and other regions, heightened use of subversive actions, and recruitment of mercenaries to carry out crimes against humanity. This strategy includes blatant violation of international law, of the principles of the founding Charter of the United Nations, distortion of the UN to make it an instrument for aggression, and massive manipulation of the media. Especially today, when we have 65 years of the creation of NATO, the biggest war machinery in the history of humankind, supposedly as a response to the Warsaw Pact, which was created later than NATO and was dissolved in 1991. It provokes every peace-loving person on earth to read and to listen to the statements of the United States of America, the European Union, or of NATO, for the respect of the international law in Ukraine, after the same forces have stimulated, paid, orchestrated a violent regime change with fascist and neo-Nazi groups who took over the government today in Kiev. The same is valid in the case of Syria, where armed religious extremist fighters are acting with the full support of the imperialists for 3 years now in order to destabilize the country and impose a willing to the West regime in Damascus. Similar situation the imperialists wanted to create in Venezuela, where the US imperialism, hand in hand with the local oligarchy, triggered violent protests using existing social problems as pretext to topple the elected leadership of the country. Venezuela, as the country with one of the biggest oil reserves in the world, has never stopped being target of the imperialists who do not hide their discontent with the Bolivarian Revolution and the popular forces since 1998. In Asia-Pacific region, the so-called return of United States of America in the region in reality is the increase of US engagement in the region. The USA has declared it would deploy 60% of its armed forces and equipment in the Asia-Pacific region, the so-called pivot to Asia. The United States of America is pressurizing countries in Asia and Pacific region to have strategic alliance with them and already signed such treaties with many countries. This is aimed at expanding its military influence as well as exploiting the mineral resources like oil and gas in the sea around the area. The USA is already engaged in joint military naval exercises as well as increasing military aid to some countries in the region. I'm going to skip some parts. To make it short, I want to, Zhivatin Ivanovich asked me to chair this session, so I want to give a good example in being disciplined in the time. In January 2012, the US Pentagon published a strategy paper on sustaining US global leadership priorities for the 21st century, in which it's openly speaking about its plans, priorities, and goals. In the press conference, which the then Secretary of Defense, Leon Panetta, gave, he mentioned certain ongoing threats, describing their strategy for after 2012, mentioning the following security and challenges and threats for the US policies. 1, the ongoing threat of violent extremism. 2, the spread of weapons of mass destruction and related raw materials. 3, the destabilizing behavior of nations such as Iran and DPR Korea. 4, the merging of new powers in Asia. 5, the changes in the Middle East. You see, by this they have covered almost all world, trying to dominate everywhere. In this context of this grand imperialist strategy, that it is clear that the fate of countries like Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, Mali, Venezuela, some of them have already been attacked, some are under threats, are linked with each other and with the US strategy. What we are witnessing today in the Ukraine is nothing but another step towards implementation of this grand imperialist strategy for the domination of the 21st century. Dear friends, the global peace movement and foremost the World Peace Council is obliged to face and object plans and the forces behind these plans. This is not always an easy task, since the imperialists are having powerful weapons, literally and metaphorically. There is the need to understand that the wars and aggressions are being caused by a system which is by its nature linked with war and exploitation. It is not a matter to change only persons or correct mistakes. Behind the Nobel Peace Prizes to US President Barack Obama or the European Union are apparently intentions and interests to wash their crimes clean and to dilute the international public opinion on their real role. What is missing, dear friends, today in this series of this Nobel Prize is now to award next time NATO for the Nobel Peace Prize. That would complete and unmask the farce for this in the 21st century regarding the Nobel Peace Prize. We note that in this regards, mass uprisings are taking place, on the other hand, as a positive response of the people, by oppressed peoples in the world against the imperialist agenda. This is exactly why the global war on terror has been launched many years back, because they are afraid of the reaction of the peoples. The strategy is to label any resistance to the imperialist agenda as a terrorist movement and crush it by military force while paralyzing the peace movement with the fear of being identified as a supporter of terrorists or of dictators, as they say. But as we have seen, the real terrorists and tyrants are the imperialists themselves. The aggression of NATO in Yugoslavia 15 years ago is helping us to draw lessons and conclusions in many ways. We salute the Belgrade Forum for the World of Equals, who is contributing decisively to this process in difficult conditions. What we need is a peace and justice movement that acts in a coordinated way, not just in response to the imperialist crimes, not just as a reactive force that only protests after the fact, but a peace movement that is proactive, that takes preventive measures rather than seeking remedies. Let us substitute imperialism's policy of preemptive military strikes with the peace movement's policy of preemptive peace strikes. Let us respond not just to wars and invasions after they happen, but to even the smallest preparations that are being made for wars and interventions before they happen. Humanity has no future under the imperialist system and its domination. Peoples of the world, its peace-loving forces, constitute the great majority which can form the common front to confront, halt, and overthrow finally the common enemy of the peoples. Thank you very much.